Show, we love questions from the audience. So you can start commenting your questions now, or you can also add them as we go. I'll be right back on to welcome our guests to the show. Thanks for meeting us for coffee. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for episode 47 of the Meet Me for Coffee podcast. It is nice to be back into a normal routine. I've had so many conferences this spring where we were creating so much podcast content around conferences, but now we are just back to the every other Tuesday morning at 9:30 a.m. Central Time is when the regular show airs. And so we're going to be refocusing in the next several episodes on what the whole purpose of the show is, which is where freight markets and economics meet. And so I couldn't think of a better way to kick off getting centered back on that than having my good friend David Spencer come on the show today to talk about freight markets. Good morning, David.
Good morning. Great to be back on the show, Samantha.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been a busy spring conference time. There's still a few more that people are like trying to knock off, I think, this spring. Have you made it to any conferences lately?
I've been lucky enough, I guess you could say, or unlucky enough to not necessarily have a packed conference schedule here in the spring, and really kind of focused on a lot of the internal efforts so far this spring, but definitely still paying attention to what's going on out there.
Awesome. Yeah. Spring and then like late fall, I feel like is when they always try to get us with putting all the conferences in at one time. So if any of you guys listening have been to a conference recently, I'd love for you to comment it. Let us know what you thought. Will you be going back next year if it's a yay or nay, just so we can all kind of share some good conference knowledge there. I know TIA Technovations is, I think, coming up. Broker Carrier Summit is in Indianapolis in a few weeks. So those are just a couple off the top of my head that are still coming up this month because it is now April 1st. Is today April Fool's?
Today's April Fool's.
Oh, okay. Well, we really are going to talk about freight markets. I actually forgot it was April Fool's. This is not a joke. So thanks, guys, for listening in. April 1st also means we are through Q1. So this is a timely time, I think, to kind of check in on things. So David, first of all, for anyone who maybe doesn't know you yet, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, no. So David Spencer, my role is Vice President of Market Intelligence at Arrive Logistics. Really, we play in the truckload brokerage space for the most part, but are definitely expanding into other mode offerings as well. Definitely have seen some explosive growth over the last 10 years or so, launching up to about the top 7 in terms of truckload brokerage. And really, my role is focused on understanding what's going on in the freight markets and how that affects our business, those that we work with, and how we communicate those findings and work with our shipper and carrier partners to navigate those challenges or opportunities.
Awesome. And can you tell everyone a little bit more too, real quickly, about the reports and newsletters that you and your team author?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, a full suite of material that our team puts out for free on a regular basis. Really, I think the main one is our monthly shipper market update. That's going to have the most detail and be the most comprehensive analysis of what's going on in the freight market and where we see reasons behind where we see rates headed in really the year ahead. And but on a more quarterly basis, a slimmed down version of that, we do publish a rate forecast that kind of gets right to the point, a much quicker read for those that are just trying to get to the concluding thoughts there and where we see rates are going. But we also do content tailored to carriers, which is essentially just a varied version of our shipper update. And then we have a quarterly Canada market update as well, and are soon working on trying to get a Mexico cross-border update out here, hopefully in the next few months.
Yeah, I think that would be timely with everything that's been going on. So thank you. I am a regular subscriber and reader of all of your guys' work, so I highly recommend anyone listening to check that out if they have not. Good morning, Bella. I know Bella didn't comment it yet, but I ran into her at Food Shippers, so she can speak to that one. Good morning, Chrissy and Alex. Have some good conferences getting dropped in here, so keep it up, guys, if you're listening. We'd love to know what conferences you've been at this spring. Okay, David, Q1's over. I would like to just ask you first. I know a lot of times around the end of the year, people like to make projections kind of going into the new year, what we can expect. We're always trying our best to look at least 3 months forward, make our best educated guesses on what we should be preparing for. So curious to get your thoughts on how Q1 did or did not live up to any expectations that you had or maybe that others had in the industry, and where we kind of find ourselves as of today, April 1st.
Yeah, it's a great question. And usually coming out of I call them the 2 main peak seasons, right? Summer or winter peak seasons. That's really when you learn a lot about where we're at in the market is how the market responded to that seasonal pressure and then how it rebounds, right? So for the back half of last year, we saw those seasonal, demand surges create some increased challenges for shippers, certainly in tender rejection data and that creating some spot market rate volatility. Definitely was the case over Christmas time and in early January. Continued bouts of some severe widespread winter weather definitely helped keep that rate volatility persisting through the better part of January, at least the first half. But then I think we saw what we'd expect to see throughout the first quarter from there, which is rates settling back down to a floor, and honestly haven't seen a whole lot of excitement outside of a few bursts around either tariffs or end of month, end of quarter here. Really anything on the van and refrigerated side of things, but certainly open deck has shown some signs of life here in that earlier building season, flatbed season, now really through July 4th.
Yeah. I saw an interesting post recently on LinkedIn. Maybe you saw something similar. There was a lot of comments from names I recognized in regards to flatbed. And it's something I've personally never looked into. Maybe you guys have, but it said that, when we see strength in flatbed markets, it can sometimes be like a forward indicator of some strength in, say, dry van or reefer markets. Maybe more they're just using flatbed movement as an indicator of, raw materials moving into production or housing materials moving into homes that will eventually require other materials. And have you ever seen any correlations or studies done on that between flatbed and maybe dry van movement?
Yeah, no, not in my experience necessarily. I think, if the flatbed market is hot, that's probably a good indication that there is a lot of spending happening in infrastructure development or that's homes, roads, et cetera. Sure. So that's probably a pretty good indicator of economic, strength and growth. I think it's a great theory that, potentially we see strong open deck activity, be a precursor or move along with van freight, but not something I've studied in the past. I think, typically we see flatbed season heat up this time of year. I don't think what we're seeing is anything that far outside the norm, although it definitely feels like a step up from the last 2 years, which
isn't saying too much, but it's saying something.
yeah, I mean, we've seen that across van and refrigerated, is that when you get into these peak seasons, a lot of these carriers have definitely slimmed down their operations. So when we see peak demand, that's going to create some challenges. And really, it's what's happening in non-peak season that we should be more focused on or talking about.
Sure. Well, speaking of things that are going on, kind of we touched on manufacturing or maybe housing activity. I know that your team looks at a lot of different economic data points and finds some cool resources. You don't just look at, what are freight rates doing right now, but we try to look at what might be driving changes in freight rates. And so what are some things that you guys are looking at? Maybe you always look at, but also is there anything specifically that you think is timely to where we fall right now at this point in the market cycle or at this point in our in the fiscal year too that you're watching?
Yeah, I guess from an economic standpoint, the most important things to really look at are what's going on with consumer spending and sentiment, and then as well as what's going on in the labor market. If you see strength in the labor market, or at least stability, and you see wage growth and you see spending, to us that's at least a pretty good indicator you're going to see a stable freight environment. But if any of those are starting to fracture in any way, then you could see an easing or weakening demand environment.
And where do we stand currently? Have we seen signs of weakening in any of these spaces?
Yeah, it's a really interesting scenario, right? I think the sentiment data seems to be leading the hard data, which is an interesting scenario, like I said, because typically when that's the case, people are making decisions out of fear, not because they're actually in that situation, right? We've had a pretty strong labor market and seen pretty strong wage growth the last few years. I do think the signs are pointing to a weakening labor market. But we haven't really seen a big shift in the hard data yet. Really, it's all in that soft data on the sentiment side. And, I think there's a lot of fear and uncertainty around what's going on with tariffs. And so you see people respond to that, right? I've seen big retailers speak to pullbacks in spending. Really, all I'm seeing in the data that we have access to is that people might be making pullbacks on discretionary, right? Essentials, basic goods, et cetera. We're not seeing any pullback in those. It's really those nice to haves that we're seeing people take their foot off the gas on going out and buying. But again, I think it could be a leading indicator. It could also just be a lot of fear of the unknown of what's going on with tariffs. So we're watching those closely.
Yeah, I've heard a few people now in conversations the last several weeks, and I even read it in, I think it was like a Transport Topics article that quoted some manufacturers, and they're just saying like there is a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of like you said, not really like even fear or just like unknowns. But yet a lot of businesses are still feeling somewhat optimistic about the direction of the overall economy, or at least their sectors. So I think it's kind of like a confusing time right now where overall things feel kind of cloudy and murky and a little bit pessimistic. But then when you dig in and companies and what I'm actually reading that they're like publishing and putting out there, like they are all still staying pretty optimistic about 2025 being overall a year of strength for them, or of growth or expansion. So I'm kind of feel like I'm getting a lot of mixed signals these days. And I think that's just the uncertainty of a lot of things right now kind of clouding the outlook.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Goldman Sachs raised their probability of recession from 20 to 35% this week. It's still a greater likelihood that we don't see a recession than we do, but certainly not trending in the right direction. I think those types of indicators are pretty good for getting like a holistic view. Really might be where we're headed. I think it's hard to imagine the tariff environment in the short term, not, at least uncertainty alone, having an impact in a way that's detrimental to freight demand in the short term. But longer term, we'll yet to see how that plays out. We've heard a lot of really interesting strategies from shippers. Anything from, hey, we're producing goods in the U.S. that are going to Canada right now, but we also have an operation in Mexico. So we're actually going to move production out of the U.S. down to Mexico and ship directly from Mexico to Canada. So you're seeing these, really strange and unique decisions or strategies that these manufacturers, shippers, producers are creating, and everyone's going to have their own unique strategies. So until we kind of get settled into the new norm, I think it's going to be a lot of questions.
Yeah. And I think tomorrow, hopefully, we're supposed to find out maybe more about what the new norm might be.
Yeah, we get an announcement on what the tariff environment is going to be, and then I think that's sort of the green light to everyone who's involved in the space on to go ahead and figure out, okay, what strategy is going to make sense for me? Can I source this domestically? Is there a a global supplier that maybe is subject to less of a tariff than my current supplier? Again, I think these finance teams everywhere across the country are going to be modeling out a lot of different scenarios, as we get into the next few weeks.
So I know I've seen reports of a lot of goods that were maybe pulled forward prior to the first round of tariffs going into effect. We had a pretty decent amount of imports recorded in December, January. And so I'm assuming while there was, I actually wrote an interesting report that we pulled in a record amount of gold bars that really skewed the data that I just found incredibly interesting. But I'm sure aside from gold bars, there was obviously a lot of other imports that were recorded coming into that have moved either into inventories or into production already. And so have we seen, I know you kind of touched briefly at a high level on rates. You said that we saw some normal seasonality return and things kind of calmed down in February. Are we seeing anything else if we dig into any freight rate data points? Are we seeing any certain pockets maybe or industries or mode types that are looking a little bit more optimistic right now than others? Or is just kind of just normal, steady as she goes seasonality right now, or even weaker than what we would typically expect?
Yeah, I think overall our narrative for the year is pretty much normal seasonality with increased vulnerability around these seasonal demand pockets, both regional demand as well as the big peak seasons. That's where, if you're a shipper, you need to be paying attention for the most part. But there are some areas we've definitely seen seem a little not necessarily out of place, but a little bit unique trends for this time of year. Definitely early weakness out of California this year, right? So if there was a big pull forward, anything on imports coming in out of California, I think a lot of the data actually points to a bigger pull forward effort ahead of the port strikes, leading to demand weakness really throughout the fourth quarter and into the early first quarter than necessarily what we've seen from the tariffs just yet. But I definitely think outbound California has been a tougher market for carriers as well. I think, outbound Houston has been kind of the opposite. We've seen a lot more activity and elevated, capacity shortages in the Houston area, for probably various different reasons. But that's probably an area we've seen a little bit outside of the norm. But other than that, it's been pretty much business as usual. South Texas started to heat up the last few weeks as we saw produce coming north, and we expect the Southeast to start to tell that story as we get later in the month of April.
And I believe this is when we're doing a transition from Yuma to Salinas as well, right? The produce market out west should be sometime soon. I think this spring.
As we get later April into early May, I think we'll start seeing, Central California and out west start to heat up a bit more as well, and as produce moves north.
Okay. Anything I know that right now is really, to me, it seems difficult this year, and it's difficult every year, but it seems difficult to talk about like Q3, Q4 with any more than kind of guesses. And if we were having this maybe even just like a week later, we'd have a little bit more certainty around what we're saying, as people kind of had a couple days to adjust to any announcements that might be made tomorrow. But what do you think about Q2? Like, something's going to change with tariffs potentially, even if there are changes, if there's not changes with tariffs tomorrow. What do you think our next 3 months is going to look like for the freight markets?
Yeah, and really just kind of, if it's possible to ignore the tariffs, I think,
Sure.
to start the conversation, really the data points I looked at that are really the most telling, about where we're at in the cycle is still that large spot to contract rate gap. It's really going to be a limiting reactant to any kind of volatility we're going to see, right? So, first, from a sustained disruption standpoint, right, the fact that our belief is that in the situations where you would see a sustained disruption, it's really going to come from shipper routing guides being unreliable. And you tend to see that more when spot rates are in line with contract rates. And right now, spot rates are still pretty far below, right? At this point, in the softer part of the year, we're at more than 40-cent delta if you look at DAT's, line haul rates. And that's certainly, like I said, going to be a limiting reactant to any volatility because, what type of an event is going to create 40+ cent jump in spot rates, very minimal type of options there on what could drive that. Right. So that's part of the reason why I think we're speaking about the back half of the year with confidence of, hey, very limited likelihood of seeing big shakeups. And then especially now, if you layer in, what's going on with tariffs, if you do see any kind of pullback or softening demand as a result of tariffs, well, that's certainly going to add to that as well and kind of keep things tame. So I'm not expecting a big adjustment to our forecast from the tariff announcement through Q2. I think DOT road check week in mid-May is still going to be a whole lot of fun for shippers. And I think, and brokers and carriers that are able to run that week are going to see some good money out there. I think if we see a lot of capacity off the road, that's probably a good indication of just where carriers are at and their ability to maintain their equipment and their fleets with today's low rate environment. And I think it's a sign that we should all be, paying attention to as well. But yeah, mid-May through July 4th, we still are going to see rate volatility. I expect shipper routing guides to have some challenges, but on the backside of that, I think we settle back into normal seasonal patterns.
Yeah. Really glad that you brought up that rate delta right now that we're seeing, because that's something that I'm looking at each month. And we try to see like a little bit of progress in closing that gap, and then it seems like we lose it, and then maybe we gain an inch, but we're definitely still a mile away. So that's been interesting to watch stay so spread for so long. I feel like a lot of people would have thought by now things would be changing, but definitely hear what you're saying there, where if I'm a shipper or I'm a broker carrier and we're all interacting in this market and contract rate acceptance is really high, and even if it does tick up a little bit and it rolls to spot, there's no carriers chasing spot loads out of contract rates. So I mean, there's not a lot of ultimate disruption for the shipper to feel of contract providers falling off or any shifts in major shakeups in their routing guide, other than maybe paying a little bit more in spot for a little bit, if that even gets passed on quick enough to the shipper. So.
Yeah, I mean, in January, at one point, we saw that delta in the low 20-cent range, I think 21 to 24 cents, right? So
yeah.
Not impossible if you get the right event at the right time, talking, leading up to July 4th, for example, where I expect to see that rate delta much closer than 40 cents as we see spot rates peaking, in peak season. Right. So it's not out of the question. It's just the risk levels are lower and the timing has to be right.
Is there anything new to add on the carrier side when we're talking about supply? I know that it seems I've been hearing that we're at equilibrium now for quite a while, and that's why normal seasonality has returned. But is there anything new that we should be considering this year?
I don't know if it's new this year necessarily, but we're starting to see, with revisions in February to the employment data, the overall trucking employment numbers are showing, almost flat compared to pre-pandemic levels. Now that's not going to take into account the owner operator capacity growth that we saw. It's also not going to take into account the growth we've seen in private fleets. Right. So those are two areas where we've seen tremendous growth, and private fleets offering shippers, greater efficiency in their network, greater service levels. We've seen strong investment there, create more options for shippers ahead of even having to go to the spot market. And so that's another area that I think, speaking to capacity is going to help keep a lid on things for a bit, is definitely the investment we've seen in private fleet growth. ACT Research data pointed to something like, potentially as much as like an 8% market share grab on the private fleet carriers away from the for-hire market. And so that, it's not just demand that's left the market, but it's demand that's left the available for-hire to market, the available for-hire market, right? And so that's going to feel like less freight to anyone playing in that space.
That's really interesting. I know it seems to me like depending on the year and the period of the freight market cycle, private fleets become more or less attractive to shippers. But do you have any kind of theories or thoughts on why so much growth in private fleet lately?
Yeah, I think they have better equipped tools to manage these fleets, and to run them efficiently and do pickups and deliveries. And, a lot of times the service levels are worth it to them, right? They understand they might have to pay a little bit more per mile, but they're in control of that equipment, so to speak. And, that's where it needs to be when it needs to be there. And I think that's really valuable to a lot of these shippers.
Yeah, I know of at least several technology platforms that are kind of now being designed to essentially route optimize across multiple shippers. So helping private fleets find the head haul versus back haul of other private fleets so that they can actually run those more efficiently if possible, I guess. So
Well, they're also adding brokerages, right? Look at Walmart or Amazon. Amazon's been doing it, right? But the ability to then, find freight for your capacity, and be really competitive in that space as well. I think shippers are learning, how to make logistics a profit center and not just a cost center. And it's definitely a changing landscape in the space today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Glad you brought that up. I talked to someone about that several months ago, and they pointed out, like, look how many large shippers, enterprise shippers specifically, are starting to build their own logistics divisions, their own brokerages, essentially in-house. And while I don't think I foresee those ever fully replacing all of their external partners by any means, it's still a significant change for their networks to be able to in-house some portion of that.
Yeah, I mean, running a logistics operation isn't always the easiest, right? So anyone in this space can attest to the challenges there. So there will be growing pains for sure, but also, like I said, advantages and opportunities for them to take advantage of.
Yeah. Well, what else, David? Is there anything else that you're finding interesting right now? Anything you're kind of keeping an eye on as we move through 2025? Anything fun, exciting, scary? I don't know. I want to hear anything.
No, I mean, I think you certainly are hearing a lot about AI in the space and where that's going to take things. I'm definitely interested to see, who the players end up becoming, the main players in the space end up becoming, and how they're making a difference in terms of productivity gains and in growth and efficiency for this industry. I think that's definitely something just from an exciting standpoint, something I'm paying attention to and watching closely, have a lot of interest in. But I think if you're a shipper and you're watching this, it's we're back to a rate floor, right? I think you're going to see some challenges around when you'd expect to see them, and just be prepared for that. But now is still a good time to be looking at contracting your freight out, and locking in these rates, and having high levels of service expectations from your carriers. I'm not really expecting a big flip to occur this year. We're kind of downgrading our chances, all in all, from the market standpoint. So whether it's exciting tech or market conditions, we're trying to watch it all.
Yeah. Any thoughts on, I guess, like recommendations for carriers for asset fleets moving into the second half of this year? I know you kind of just spoke briefly to shippers, but anything specific to note for the asset side of the industry?
Yeah, look, it's all about utilization. The greater utilization you get in your equipment, we're seeing those are the ones that are having the most success and able to capture the greatest profits at this point in time. Easier said than done, I know that, but who are the shippers that are limiting detention for you and messing up your ability to run that equipment efficiently? Pay attention to those things. service your freight well, protect that freight that you have. And we're going to get through this. At some point, we'll be on the other side of this, the rate floor that we're at today.
Yeah. When does I think your newsletter just came out recently, right? So the next one will be publishing mid-April?
Yeah, mid-April or so will be our next release on the shipper market update, and new and improved format. We've cut a lot of the text out of the file. I think something like 7 or 8 pages of text.
No.
But all the same data is in there, and what we've done is try and refine it into more key takeaways and bullets, so that they're not reading the same. People who are consuming the report aren't reading sort of the same message over and over again, and we pull all of that together into sort of like a single take or an outlook at the top, and allow you to dig into the data. If that's more your taste. So just trying to make it easier to consume and more enjoyable to get through the content and a little bit quicker. But so mid-April will be the next release, and LinkedIn will be a great place for that. You can also go to our website, arrivelogistics.com, navigate to the insights page, and subscribe to that content. Most recent reports should be still pretty useful for you.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think I got it last week or something. So if you guys haven't checked that one out, definitely recommend that you do while it's available. David, you are also on LinkedIn, so I assume people can connect with you there if they had any questions about anything that you mentioned today on the podcast.
Yeah, feel free to reach out at any time. We do regular, conversations and discussions with those that are willing to speak up, give feedback, and ask questions, especially if you're interested in working with Arrive. Definitely a bonus for us to make time. But reach out at any point here on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect and share my thoughts.
Yeah. And then, Chris, I missed Chris's comment, but I was going to tell him that David, towards the beginning, he brought up consumer sentiment kind of leading the data, the hard economic data. And so I think you guys are probably aligned there and on the same page around consumer confidence, not exactly giving us the warm and fuzzies right now. I know. I actually drink my coffee so early in the day that by the time I get on this, I'm like already into my water for the day. I got a giant jug of water, not a coffee cup. But rest assured, guys, I get plenty of coffee in the mornings. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you have any questions, if you're listening back to this on LinkedIn later, feel free to still drop a comment, tag myself, tag David if you have a question that you didn't get to ask. And it's LinkedIn. So we'll see it at some point. We'll circle back around to it. Be happy to answer those questions. And we will see you all in a couple of weeks on the next episode. But thank you, everyone, for joining us for coffee.
Thank you all. Thank you, Samantha.
Yeah, absolutely.